forced to marry a paralyzed man, until her kiss made him stand for love. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The golden lights of the ballroom glowed softly on a night that was meant to be a celebration, but the air was thick with whispers. Guests watched as a young woman in a lace wedding gown walked toward the man in a wheelchair waiting at the altar. Her name was Grace Miller, and her hands were trembling as she reached for him. Across from her sat Ryan Cole, a man who once ruled the headlines as the genius heir of Cole Health Group. Now, after the accident, he could not walk. His calm gray eyes were unreadable, like polished steel hiding pain. The priest's voice echoed through the hall. "You may kiss the groom." Grace hesitated, her breath catching. All eyes were on her. She leaned closer, her fingers brushing his chest. "Do we really have to?" she whispered. Ryan's lips curved faintly. "It is the final term of our contract, Mrs. Cole. Let us give them the show they paid for." Gasps spread through the crowd as their lips touched, cold, distant, mechanical. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "She married him for the money." Another voice replied, "Poor man, he cannot even stand." Grace's eyes burned, but she kept her smile. She had promised herself to endure this 1 year. 1 year of pretending. 1 year to save her mother's life. Only 7 days earlier, she was just another barista in a downtown cafe, juggling medical bills and eviction threats. Her mother's heart surgery had been postponed again because the insurance had expired. Grace had tried everything: extra shifts, online fundraising, but the number on the bill never stopped growing. That evening, a lawyer in a dark suit had appeared at the counter. "Miss Miller," he said, handing her a card embossed with the Cole Health logo. "My client would like to discuss a proposal that could solve all your financial problems." She almost laughed. "What kind of proposal?" He smiled politely. "A marriage one." At first, she thought it was a cruel joke, but when she sat in the lawyer's office the next day, surrounded by legal documents, she realized it was real. Ryan Cole, 32, paralyzed after a tragic car crash, needed to marry before his upcoming birthday to retain his position as CEO. If he failed, the board led by his stepmother would take control of the company. In exchange, he would pay off all of Grace's debts and cover her mother's treatment. Grace remembered staring at the contract, her hands cold. "You are asking me to marry a stranger for money," she said quietly. The lawyer replied, "Not for money, Miss Miller, for security for both of you." That night, her mother's heart monitor beeped erratically in the hospital. The doctor's words were clear. "Without immediate surgery, we might lose her." Grace signed the papers the next morning. Now, as the wedding crowd applauded politely, she realized that her new life had begun not with love or joy, but with an agreement sealed under the weight of necessity. The ceremony ended, the guests dispersed, and the grand hall fell silent. Grace turned toward the man she had just married. His expression was as still as marble. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Cole," he said softly, his tone neither cruel nor kind. Grace nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I hope it is worth it." As she pushed his wheelchair out of the ballroom, the echoes of the crowd faded behind them. Neither of them knew that one day, this woman who had married him out of duty would become the reason he stood again this time. Not for business, not for pride, but for love. Grace had always believed that choices defined people, but this one did not feel like a choice at all. A week earlier, she had been standing behind the counter of the small cafe near downtown, wiping coffee cups while rain streaked down the windows. The bell above the door chimed, and a man in a dark gray suit stepped inside. He was older, polished, carrying the quiet authority of someone used to giving orders. "Miss Miller?" he asked, holding out a business card embossed with silver letters. "My name is Richard Hayes. I represent Cole Health Group. My client would like to discuss a private matter that may solve your current financial situation." Grace blinked, unsure how a hospital corporation could have anything to do with her. "I think you have the wrong person," she said politely. He smiled, calm and certain. "You are not the wrong person. You are exactly who he asked for." That sentence followed her all night. When she returned home, her mother was asleep in the narrow hospital bed set up in their apartment. The air smelled faintly of medicine and lavender lotion. Grace sat beside her, scrolling through unpaid bills on her phone until the numbers blurred. Then, almost against her will, she called the number on the card. The next morning, she found herself sitting across from Richard Hayes in a marble office high above the city. On the wall behind him hung a photograph of Ryan Cole shaking hands with world leaders and investors. The caption read, "Rebuilding Health, One Life at a Time." Mr. Hayes opened a folder and spoke in the measured tone of a man who dealt in impossible things. "Mr. Cole requires a marriage. Legally binding, for 1 year. The arrangement will allow him to retain control of his late father's company against the challenge of his stepmother, Mrs. Victoria Cole. In return, every one of your mother's hospital bills will be cleared immediately. She will also receive priority treatment at Cole Memorial Hospital." Grace stared at him, the hum of the city far below echoing in her ears. "You are serious? You want me to marry a man I've never met?" "He has reviewed your profile," Hayes said. "He believes you to be suitable." The word struck her like an insult. She stood up, gathering her purse. "Tell him I am not for sale." Hayes's tone did not change. "I understand, but if you change your mind, the offer will expire in 72 hours. After that, your mother's case will be moved to a public hospital waiting list. I am truly sorry." That night the power went out in their apartment. Grace sat in the dark beside her mother's bed, listening to the weak rhythm of her breathing. The heart monitor battery blinked red. She whispered, "Hold on, Mom. I will fix this, somehow." The next morning, a nurse called to say her mother's condition had worsened. Grace ran through the rain to the hospital, soaked and shaking. The doctor met her at the door. "We need to operate soon, Miss Miller. Without insurance or a payment guarantee, we cannot proceed." Something inside her broke. She looked at her mother through the glass, so pale, so small, and realized love sometimes meant surrendering pride. That evening, she stood once again in Mr. Hayes's office, dripping from the rain, the city lights burning behind her like judgment. "Tell Mr. Cole," she said quietly. "I will sign the contract." Hayes nodded, sliding the document across the table. "There are a few terms you must understand. You will be Mrs. Grace Cole, wife of Ryan Cole, for a minimum of 12 months. You will attend public events as his spouse. You will maintain discretion at all times. There will be no physical expectations." Grace's voice trembled but did not break. "I do not want his money beyond my mother's care. I want to know she will live." "She will," Hayes replied, sealing the papers with his pen. "And so will he, in a way." When Grace left the office, the rain had stopped, but the city felt heavier. She clutched the signed contract to her chest, her reflection flashing across every glass building she passed. In a penthouse miles away, Ryan Cole set the folder aside on his desk. The rhythmic hum of his wheelchair filled the quiet as he stared out at the skyline. He had just secured his company, yet he felt nothing but the hollow ache of victory. For Grace, it was the beginning of a bargain with fate. For Ryan, it was another transaction to protect his empire. Neither of them could imagine that this contract born out of desperation would soon demand something neither had left to give: their hearts. 3 days after signing the papers, Grace was escorted to the Cole residence for the official introduction. The mansion stood at the edge of the Hudson River, a fortress of glass and stone, cold and flawless like the man who owned it. The driveway curved through a forest of manicured trees, and every step Grace took toward the door felt heavier than the last. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and money. A housekeeper guided her through the grand foyer where portraits of the Cole family lined the walls, paintings of men in suits and women with perfect smiles. At the far end, sitting by the fireplace, was Ryan Cole. He turned his wheelchair slightly as she approached. He was even more intimidating in person. Broad shoulders beneath a charcoal suit, clean-shaven, with hair too neat to belong to someone who had stopped caring about the world. His eyes, a muted gray, met hers without warmth or hostility, just calculation. "So," he said quietly, "you are Grace Miller, or should I say, Mrs. Cole?" Grace nodded, standing straight though her knees trembled. "You do not have to pretend this is anything more than a contract, Mr. Cole." His lips curved faintly. "Good, I do not intend to." A lawyer entered the room with a leather folder. "We need both parties to sign the final version. It outlines expectations and boundaries." Ryan rolled closer to the desk. His hands were strong, his movements practiced, even as the faint hum of the wheelchair filled the silence. "You will live here," he said, his tone even. You will attend social events with me when required. You will have your own room. There will be no intimacy, no emotional obligations. This arrangement is business, nothing more." Grace crossed her arms. "You forgot one rule." He raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" She met his gaze steadily. "Do not treat me like I am another piece of your company's property. I am here because I made a promise to my mother, not because I need your pity." Something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, or respect, but it vanished quickly. "Noted," he said. They both signed. The scratch of pen on paper sounded like a lock clicking shut. After the lawyer left, the silence between them grew heavy. Ryan broke it first. "Dinner is at 7. Formal attire. My staff will assist you." "Understood," she replied, her voice tight. That evening, she followed a housekeeper to her new room on the second floor. It overlooked the river, the view stunning but strangely lifeless. A vase of white lilies sat by the window, their scent too clean, almost sterile. Grace unpacked slowly, staring at the new dresses hanging in the closet, expensive, impersonal, all tagged with her name. Downstairs, at precisely 7, she found Ryan already at the dining table. The room was long enough for an echo. He sat at one end, she at the other. A servant poured wine neither of them touched. "How is your mother?" he asked suddenly. Grace looked up, startled. "She had her surgery this morning. Your hospital staff said the operation went well." He nodded once, then returned his attention to his untouched plate. "Good. Then our deal has begun without complications." For a moment, anger flashed in her chest. "You talk about lives like they are transactions." He looked at her sharply. "That is exactly what they are. Everything costs something, Mrs. Cole. Some people pay in money. Others pay in years." His words cut deeper than he knew. Grace swallowed hard and said nothing. The sound of rain began to fall against the tall windows, steady and relentless. After dinner, she excused herself and wandered through the dim hallways. Her footsteps echoed on marble floors. Behind one closed door, she heard faint music, piano keys, hesitant but haunting. Peeking through the crack, she saw Ryan at the instrument. His wheelchair was angled slightly back, fingers moving across the keys with deliberate slowness. It was the first time she had seen his face without the armor of control. There was pain there, but also something fragile, hope, or maybe memory. She did not interrupt. She only listened until the last note faded. When she finally turned away, she realized something unexpected. The man she had just married was not made entirely of steel and silence. He was broken, yes, but not beyond repair. Upstairs, as she closed her door, she whispered to herself, "I will survive this year, and maybe, so will he." In the darkness of the mansion, Ryan stared at the piano, his fingers still trembling slightly. For the first time in months, he had played a melody without forcing it. He exhaled slowly and murmured to the empty room, "Do not get used to her, Cole. It is only business." But deep down, a voice he could not silence replied, "Then why did it not feel like business at all?" The morning after their first dinner as husband and wife, Grace woke to a house that already moved without her. Servants hurried down the halls, the smell of coffee filled the air, and somewhere below, the low hum of Ryan's wheelchair rolled across the marble floor. She washed her face, fixed her hair, and reminded herself that this was not a home. It was a job she had chosen to survive. When she stepped into the main hall, Ryan was already by the elevator, reviewing papers on a digital tablet. "You are up early," he said without looking at her. "So are you," she replied, walking closer. "I have a board meeting in an hour. You will accompany me." Grace blinked. "To a meeting?" He finally turned toward her. "You are my wife, Grace. At least to the world you are. It is important that people see stability, even if it is staged." She wanted to argue, but his tone left no room. So she changed into a navy dress left by the stylist and followed him to the car. At the Cole Health headquarters, marble and glass stretched to the sky. People greeted Ryan with cautious respect, pretending not to glance at the chair that carried him. Grace walked beside him, her chin high despite the curious stares. During the meeting, she stayed silent, observing how his voice, calm and exact, filled the boardroom. He commanded authority not with power, but with precision. Yet behind the professional mask, there was tension, especially when his stepmother, Victoria Cole, entered. "Ryan," Victoria said sweetly, her pearl earrings glinting under the lights. "You look tired, dear. Marriage must already be exhausting you." "Good morning, Victoria," he answered evenly. "This is Grace, my wife." Grace offered a polite smile. "It is nice to meet you, Mrs. Cole." Victoria's eyes swept over her like a scanner, pausing at her modest dress and the faint nervousness in her hands. "Lovely," she said, though the word carried no warmth. "I hope you will find your place here. The Cole family has high expectations." As the meeting continued, Grace watched the subtle power struggle unfold: numbers, profits, policies. But what caught her attention was a quiet note in Ryan's folder, written in blue ink. "Physical therapy schedule overdue 2 months." When they returned home, Grace could not hold it in. "Why are you skipping your therapy sessions?" He set his tablet aside, expression hardening. "Because they are pointless. I have been through a dozen programs. I am not a miracle waiting to happen." "But the doctor said your condition is incomplete," she argued. "That means there is still a chance." Ryan's voice grew sharper. "Do not quote medical terms you barely understand. I live in this body, Grace. I know what it cannot do." She flinched, then steadied herself. "Maybe it cannot, or maybe you just will not let it." Silence filled the room. For a second, his hands tightened on the wheels, the veins along his wrists tense. "You think pity makes you brave?" he said quietly. "You signed this contract to save your mother, not to save me." "You are right," she replied, her voice low. "But maybe saving one person is not enough anymore." She turned and left before he could answer. That night, she went online and searched through rehabilitation videos, learning exercises and mobility routines. By dawn, she was in the mansion's private gym, dragging mats and balance bars closer to the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. When Ryan rolled in later, half curious and half annoyed, he found her adjusting a set of hand weights. "What are you doing?" he asked. She looked up, a spark of determination in her eyes. "You are not the only one with a contract. I promised myself that I would not live here uselessly. If you will not go to therapy, therapy will come to you." He stared at her for a long time, then let out a slow breath. "You are stubborn, Mrs. Cole." She smiled faintly. "Good. It means I will fit right in." As sunlight touched the polished floor, Grace stood beside the man who refused to believe in miracles, unaware that she had already become one, his first reason to try again. By the second week, the mansion had fallen into a quiet rhythm. Grace would bring Ryan his morning coffee at 8, check the medication chart, and clear the therapy space she had created in the gym. He still protested every session, but she noticed the small changes, the way his tone softened, the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she was not looking. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the tall windows, she set a playlist on her phone and said, 15 minutes, that is all I ask." Ryan sighed. "You are relentless. Consistency is the secret," she replied. "That is what my mother always says." He stared at her for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod. "Fine, 15 minutes." Grace moved beside him, adjusting his posture and showing him how to shift his weight. She guided his hands to the balance bars, her touch gentle but firm. "Do not lock your shoulders," she said softly. "I am aware," he muttered, though his jaw tightened as pain flickered through his legs. "It hurts because you are trying," she reminded him. "That is a good thing. Great." For a brief moment he met her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, something neither of them was ready to name. That evening, the Cole Health Foundation hosted a charity gala for spinal injury patients. Ryan insisted on attending, saying it was a business obligation. Grace accompanied him, her navy gown glimmering under the chandelier lights. The ballroom was filled with laughter and clinking glasses, but whispers followed them wherever they went. "That is the new wife," someone murmured. "A nurse?" "No, a cafe girl, I heard. She married him for the money. Everyone knows." Grace pretended not to hear, though her chest tightened. At the far end of the room, she caught sight of Victoria Cole, elegant and composed, speaking with a group of board members. When their eyes met, Victoria smiled sweetly, falsely. Later, during a conversation near the buffet, a shareholder leaned too close to Grace. His voice reeked of wine. "You must be lonely, Mrs. Cole. A young woman like you, trapped in a contract with a man who cannot even stand." Before she could step away, Ryan's wheelchair turned sharply. His voice cut through the noise. "I believe my wife said no." The man froze, his smirk vanishing. Ryan's tone was calm, but his hands gripped the wheel so hard that his knuckles turned white. "If you have business with me, schedule a meeting. Otherwise, stay away from her." The crowd fell silent. Grace's heart pounded. For the first time, she saw anger in his eyes, not the cold, defensive kind, but something raw, protective. When they returned home, she followed him into the study. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. Yes, I did, he replied without looking at her. People like him think power gives them permission. I used to be one of those people. She stepped closer. What happened to you, Ryan? He let out a hollow laugh. You already know what happened. The accident. Quote, I mean before that. Why did you stop fighting? For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice dropped, low and steady. Because I killed someone, Grace. Not with intent, but with pride. My car went off the bridge that night. She was sitting beside me. Her name was Megan. She was my fiancée. Grace froze. The room felt suddenly smaller. The papers said you were drunk. I was not, he said. But I was angry. She wanted to end things, said I had turned into a stranger. I told her she would regret leaving me, and I drove too fast. When the rain hit, I lost control. He swallowed hard. I walked away from that crash. A week later, my legs stopped responding. The doctors said it was nerve trauma. I say it was punishment. Grace's voice trembled. You cannot keep punishing yourself forever. He turned to her, eyes filled with exhaustion. Then tell me, Grace, how do you forgive yourself for killing someone who loved you? She had no answer. She only stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. Maybe you start by trying to live again, for both of you. He looked at her hand, then up into her face. You are a strange woman, Mrs. Cole. Good, she whispered. It means I still surprise you. That night, as she returned to her room, Grace thought about his confession and the pain he carried like armor. For the first time, she saw the man behind the fortune not a millionaire bound to his chair, but a soul trapped between guilt and hope. In another part of the house, Ryan sat in the dark beside the piano, his fingers resting on the keys. For the first time since the crash, he played again. The melody was broken, imperfect, but it was real. The next few weeks moved quietly, but beneath the calm, Grace could feel the tension building. Ryan was more focused now. He began showing up to therapy sessions without protest, his movements deliberate, his breathing steady. He was still sharp with his words, but there was a new fire in him, something closer to determination than anger. Every morning, Grace would find him already in the gym, working on the exercises she had taught him. He would not admit it, but she knew he was doing it for himself this time, not for the contract. One morning, as she entered with a towel and water bottle, she found him leaning forward in his chair, gripping the bars with trembling hands. Ryan, she said softly, you should not push yourself without supervision. He glanced at her, sweat glistening on his temples. I need to prove something. To whom? She asked. His voice dropped to a whisper. To the people waiting for me to fail. Grace frowned. You mean your stepmother? Ryan gave a bitter smile. Victoria never wanted me to inherit the company. She and her partners have been waiting for me to be declared unfit to lead. The only thing standing in their way is this marriage. Grace's stomach turned. That is why she keeps showing up at those events. She is not supporting you. She is studying you. He nodded slowly. She has been leaking stories to the press about my mental health, about you being a gold digger. If she gets proof that our marriage is a contract, she will take everything. Grace felt a chill run through her. What can we do? Stay quiet. Keep playing the part, Ryan said. She cannot destroy what she cannot prove. But that evening, as Grace brought him tea in the study, she overheard a conversation through the half-open door. Victoria's voice carried through the phone speaker. Yes, I want every document you can find. The contract, the signatures, everything. When this leaks, the board will have no choice but to remove him. Grace froze. She stepped back silently, heart pounding. If that contract reached the media, it would not just ruin Ryan, it would destroy her too. She remembered her mother's words from the hospital. Do the right thing, even when it costs you. The next day, Grace visited the hospital to check on her mother. While waiting in the lobby, she ran into an older nurse who had once worked the emergency shift on the night her father died. The nurse hesitated, then said something that made Grace's world tilt. It was not Ryan's decision, dear. The hospital cut the night staff that week. Orders came from Victoria Cole herself. We were heartbroken, but there was nothing we could do. Grace stood in stunned silence. The anger she had carried for years suddenly twisted into something new clarity. Ryan had been the face she blamed, but Victoria had been the hand behind it all. That evening, she returned to the mansion, determination burning in her chest. She found Ryan in the gym, exhausted but still training. You were not the reason my father died, she said firmly. He looked up, startled. What? It was Victoria. She was the one who cut the emergency staff that night. She caused those deaths, not you. Ryan's face hardened. Are you sure? I heard it from someone who was there, Grace said. And if she did that, she will not stop until she owns everything you have left. Ryan sat in silence, the truth sinking in. Then he looked at her with something like respect, mixed with regret. You could walk away from this, Grace. You have done enough. She shook her head. No, you helped save my mother's life. Now it is my turn to save yours. For the first time, Ryan smiled, not the polite kind, but a real one, small and quiet. Then we fight together. And from that night on, they became more than two strangers bound by paper. They became allies, two people who had both lost too much, finally learning that redemption sometimes begins with standing beside someone who refuses to let you fall. Days passed after the gala, but the echoes of that night refused to fade. The media storm was relentless. Every news outlet ran the same headline: Contract marriage scandal shakes Cole health. Grace stopped checking her phone because every comment felt like a wound, words from strangers who thought they knew her story. She spent most of her time in the guest room, away from the noise. Ryan barely left his study. Meals went untouched, and the air in the mansion felt colder than ever. One evening, as Grace stood by the window watching the city lights, she heard a soft knock. Ryan rolled into the room, his face drawn and tired. You should not hide up here, he said quietly. I am not hiding, she replied, though her voice trembled. I am just tired of being the villain in a story I did not write. Ryan sighed. I tried to protect you. She turned toward him, her eyes filled with hurt. By admitting to the world that our marriage was fake? You did not protect me, Ryan. You humiliated me. I told the truth, he said. It was the only way to stop her. Grace shook her head. You do not understand. You were saving your company. I was saving my dignity. We are not fighting the same battle. Silence filled the room. Ryan looked down at his hands, his voice barely a whisper. Then tell me what to do. Nothing, she said. You cannot fix this. I am leaving tomorrow. He looked up sharply. Leaving? Yes, she said. The hospital bills are paid. My mother is recovering, and the world already thinks the worst of me. I need to start over somewhere they do not know my name. For a long time, Ryan said nothing. The sound of the rain against the window filled the space between them. Finally, he nodded once. If that is what you want, I will not stop you. Grace's heart ached at the calm in his voice. Take care of yourself, Ryan. When she turned to pack, he watched her go, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the hall. For the first time since the accident, the house felt emptier than the chair beneath him. That night, Ryan sat in the rehab room alone. He stared at the parallel bars Grace had set up months ago. Her words replayed in his mind. Maybe you just will not let it. He gripped the bars tightly, trying to lift himself. His arms trembled, his breath came in gasps, and his body refused to obey. Finally, he collapsed to the floor, pain shooting through his legs. For a moment, he wanted to give up again, to accept that this was his punishment. But then he saw the small sticky note still attached to the mirror, Grace's handwriting, faded but clear. Stand up when it hurts. That is when it matters most. He pressed his forehead to the cold floor and whispered, Grace, I am sorry. The next morning, news broke that Victoria Cole had begun negotiating a sale of her shares to an investment group planning to strip the company of its community programs. Grace saw the headline while sitting in a cafe across town. Her chest tightened. Ryan would lose everything, and Patience would lose the care his father had built. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and hurried to the car. As rain poured over the windshield, she whispered to herself, I said I was done, but some things are worth one last fight. Hours later, she entered the mansion, drenched and determined. She found Ryan in the gym again, trying and failing to pull himself upright. She rushed forward, kneeling beside him. Ryan, listen to me, she said. Victoria is selling the company. If she succeeds, everything your father stood for will disappear. He shook his head weakly. I cannot stop her. I can barely stand. Grace cupped his face with trembling hands. Then stand for the right reason this time, not for the company, not for me, for what is right. Her voice broke, but her eyes stayed locked on his. You said I made you stronger. Prove it. He stared at her, the storm raging outside mirrored in his gaze. Slowly, his hands found the bars again. With a groan that came from somewhere deep within, he began to rise, shaking, struggling, but rising. For the first time, Grace smiled through her tears. That is it, Ryan. Stand for love and for everything that still matters. The morning of the board meeting arrived with skies heavy and gray. Rain streaked the tall glass windows of the Cole Health headquarters as reporters gathered outside waiting for another scandal. Inside the conference hall, every seat was filled. Executives whispered, cameras clicked, and at the center of the long table sat Victoria Cole, her expression calm, almost smug. The room fell silent when the elevator doors opened. Ryan entered, dressed in a dark suit, his wheelchair moving steadily across the polished floor. Grace walked beside him, holding a folder pressed tightly against her chest. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Victoria's voice broke the silence. "Well, this is unexpected. I thought you would be too ashamed to show your face." Ryan met her gaze. "I have nothing to be ashamed of, Victoria, but you should." Murmurs rippled through the room. He placed a document on the table. "These are internal records from the night Cole Memorial cut emergency staff to save costs. You signed that order. People died because of it, including the father of my wife." The color drained from Victoria's face. "You cannot prove that." Grace stepped forward and opened her folder. "Actually, we can. The original memo bears your signature, and the nurse on duty gave a sworn statement this morning. This is not about revenge. It is about truth." The board members began to whisper louder. Ryan continued, his voice steady. "You have spent years using this company to build your power. My father built it to heal people. Today, we decide which vision wins." For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then, one by one, the board members began casting their votes. When the final result was announced, Victoria was removed from all executive duties, pending a full investigation. Ryan exhaled deeply, emotion flickering in his eyes. Grace placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It is over," she whispered. He looked up at her and said softly, "No, it is beginning." Later that afternoon, as the clouds finally broke, Ryan returned to the rehab room with Grace by his side. He moved toward the parallel bars, hesitated, and then stood. His legs shook, his grip tightened, but he stayed upright. Grace's eyes filled with tears. He turned to her, smiling through the effort. "You were right. The pain means I am still alive." She laughed, crying at the same time, and standing. 6 months later, the company had changed. Community programs were restored, and Ryan's story became one of resilience, not scandal. He still used the wheelchair for long distances, but he could walk short steps on his own. The press called it a miracle, but Grace knew it was not magic, it was choice. On a quiet afternoon, she joined him on the rooftop garden of the hospital, where flowers swayed gently in the wind. Ryan held a small envelope. "The contract we signed a year ago," he said. "It expires today." Grace smiled faintly. "Then I suppose this is goodbye." He shook his head. "No, it is a new beginning." He handed her a new paper, handwritten, simple. It read, "Contract of the Heart, Clause 1. We do not run from love, no matter how hard it gets." Grace's eyes glistened. "This time, there is no payment, no deadline?" Ryan's voice softened. "Only forever." She laughed through her tears and whispered, "Then I accept." As the sun set over the city, he pulled her into his arms. Behind them, his wheelchair stood empty under the golden light, no longer a symbol of loss, but of everything they had overcome. Their story had begun with a contract born of desperation, but it ended with a promise written in love, a promise that healing does not erase scars. It teaches the heart to stand tall, even when it still trembles.